Welcome to episode 15 of The Culinary Citizen, a gastronomic guide to international relations. This is Sam Chappell-Sokol.
And Kelsey Marr. Each episode, we introduce you to a concept or a theme connecting food and people around the world. This week, we are speaking to author, chef, educator, and television personality, Amy Riolo. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Kelsey. Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Amy. Welcome to the program. A little bit of background. Amy has written multiple cookbooks about Mediterranean cuisine and the Mediterranean diet, including Nile-style Egyptian cuisine and culture, and the Ultimate Mediterranean Diet Cookbook, among others. She regularly speaks about the Mediterranean diet, as well as about culinary diplomacy, and has spoken at the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian Institution, National Geographic, and embassies around the world. She also teaches cooking and baking classes at l'Académie de Cuisine in Bethesda, Maryland, a school I had got to visit a couple years ago with a group of chefs of heads of state. Had some amazing food made by the students there, so that was fun. Amy is a member of Les Dames d'Escoffier, Slow Food DC, and the James Beard Foundation, and somehow manages to find time to teach children's cooking classes and mentor culinary students. Amy, you have quite a few things going on. Can you tell us just like a little bit about a day in your life, or maybe a week or a month, or like how do you find time to do all the things that you do?
Sure. Well, they are different, and there are 24 hours in the day. And I think as you go, you get a little bit, more speed under your belt, and you're able to do things a little more quickly. So I've been doing this for about 10 years now, and it's really fun. I enjoy it. And so there's never an off time. It's even in when I'm sleeping and when I'm dreaming, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next. A typical day would be, for example, today I had some meetings this morning, and I did some different work on menus and research for the books that I'm working on. And then I have this appointment, and we're talking together. Afterwards, I'll go start prepping dough for a class that I have tomorrow. And then as soon as my dough is prepped, I'll come back and start working on another new book idea that I'm working on. But every day is different. Some days I'm really kind of out and doing lecturing and talking and with people in very public type events or television or radio. And other days I'm just at home doing research or in the kitchen working on things. So it's a nice balance of very public and very, very private.
Nice. You're the second person we've had on the show who has self-identified as a culinary diplomat. Tell us about your path of becoming a professional culinary diplomat.
Sure, Kelsey. Well, it's been a long time in the making, and it's not a term that I was even very familiar with until recently. But I was always just about promoting cultures through food, because I grew up in a very small town in Western New York, and we didn't have a lot of different cultures there, and I was only around my family until I went to school, so I didn't have a huge interaction with a lot of different people, and I always thought of that as a luxury. So when I got older and I moved and I went to college and I got to live overseas and really got to know people at a very intimate level in different places, I felt like that was such an opportunity that I had, that I wanted to be able to share it with others and to kind of transform my knowledge into some kind of work. And so that's how I got into the writing and the lecturing. I started out speaking at embassies. I was having a meeting because I live, in the Washington, D.C. area, and I do a lot of cultural activities. At that time, I was doing a lot of cultural bridge building just for interest. And so I was speaking with the then ambassador of the Egyptian embassy, and I said, I'd like to do a lecture here. And he said, well, sure, we have this ambassador's lecture series. What are you thinking of talking on? And I said, I'd like to talk about how this is before my book. I said, I'd like to talk about how the three monotheistic faiths formed the cuisine of Egypt. And he just kind of looked at me and he said, okay, we've never done anything like that before, but sure. And so I did it. And he said, I have to warn you, not a lot of people come to these things. And I said, it's okay. It's my first one. I just kind of want to test the waters. And it ended up being standing room only. And we had a lot of interest. And so I said, okay, I've tried to talk about culture before, nobody comes. I've tried to talk about religion before, nobody comes. I talk about food, and I can still talk about culture and religion, and everybody comes. So it's a lot of fun. So I think I'm onto something. And so that's how I started. And at the time, I had gotten the chance to go to Saudi Arabia with the Royal Protocol. This was in 2007. And so I was thinking about, how can I talk about that? And I was pitching all these different book ideas to different publishers. Nothing was selling. And then this one publisher that I had wrote to me actually when I was in Saudi Arabia. And she said, we want to work with you. We think you have great ideas, but just these ones that you've given us aren't quite what we need. Let us know if you have any other ideas. And I was out of ideas. And I wrote back and I said, thank you so much. I'm actually in Saudi Arabia. I'm in a palace and I'm writing this from their office. I don't have any other ideas right now. I'll let you know, when I'm back home. And she wrote back immediately and said, you're what? You're where? That's the idea we want. So they sent me the contract to Arabian Delights actually in that palace. And I signed it and actually stayed there and did research and things. From that, I started my blog, which at that time was called Dining with Diplomats, because the publisher said, you're a writer now, you need to have a blog. And I said, but my life's not so interesting. I just, I do my research and I go around. They said, yeah, but you drop names of princes and diplomats and ambassadors, and that's everyday people aren't doing that. So maybe that would be something you could focus on. So I called the blog Dining with Diplomats, and I started out going to each embassy, working either with a diplomat or the ambassador or the ambassador's spouse or someone else in the community, talking about food, talking about their customs, and then putting it on my blog. And then as my career developed and I started doing, many other books and many other things, I just changed the blog name to my own name. But I still do a lot of the same work or talk about the same things. And then I also, at that time, I was chairing a sister city organization. So I was traveling back and forth to Egypt and spending months on end there doing a lot of, diplomatic type work. And then because of my field, I would also do restaurant consulting and other things like that. So that kind of expanded my knowledge. By the time I came back here, then a lot of embassies wanted my help, with different menus or different events. And one thing just kind of led to another. The Travel Channel called me because they were doing an embassy row special and they wanted me to appear on it. And it really became just a thing that I did for fun. And I love it.
Quick question, just jumping in. Are there culinary overlaps? This is a side note. Culinary overlaps between the sister cities of Baltimore and Luxor? Like, if you were doing a culinary exchange between those two cities, what would you see are the connections you can make?
Between Baltimore and Luxor, or between Alexandria and Luxor?
Oh, did you say? Sorry, what was the sister city of?
Sure, there are actually three in Egypt, because when they started, they wanted to be originally only Baltimore and Luxor many years ago, but okay. Luxor wasn't considered to be big enough a city, so they had to also add Alexandria. So all three cities are sister cities.
Got it.
Are you asking about the culinary left between the U.S. and them, or between the two of them in Egypt?
Between the U.S. and the Egyptian cities.
There actually is, believe it or not. And I think a lot of the ties in have to do with the fact of, being on the Chesapeake Bay and that kind of water relationship that we have in the Eastern Shore in Maryland. And then also with the importance of the bodies of water in Egypt, because, Alexandria is on the Mediterranean, but then south of there you have the Nile, and Luxor, the Nile is amazing. And it's such a, important kind of thread of life. And so that was where I kind of started with those, was this idea of you had these ways of water which brought commerce and brought people and what our history is based upon, but actually also food and different dishes. So in the south of Egypt, they have a lot of originally Nubian traditions, which got handed down, like hibiscus and okra and things like that. And those are important Southern American traditions. So you can look at it kind of that way too and talk about that. But other than that, there aren't a lot of specific foods that are eaten between the two of them. So when I would have dinners, what I would do is I would try to have foods that were symbolic in Baltimore, but also foods that were symbolic in either city in Egypt, and then make a menu with kind of different poetry from different either American poets or Egyptian poets, and weave in the sentiment of the poetry through the food. Very
cool. I'm curious, as I've been writing about the field of culinary diplomacy for the past couple of years, but it sounds like you have been doing this for a lot longer. How were you introduced to the term culinary diplomacy, and how did you decide to connect that connected to what you had been working on for 5 years before that?
Sure, Sam. Well, it sounds funny. I've been doing it, but I never thought of the term. And sometimes we get so into our niche and the reason why we're behind it, why we do it, what we like about it, that we don't often think about, how to categorize it, how to sell it. And I just thought of this as something I did. I kind of like my life's mission. I wasn't looking for a hashtag or anything like that, but it wasn't until last year that I was at the State Department and I was at one of the events for the Diplomatic Culinary Partnership when someone came up to me who was involved in the program and said, Amy, you were doing this before anybody. Now there's a term for it, but you've been doing this for a long time. And I looked at them and I said, yeah, I have. I guess I'll start using that term. But when I tell people, when I go in lectures, I always tell them, there are many different types of diplomacy. There's, traditional diplomacy itself, which is, the profession or the act of managing international relations, and typically with a representative of a country or a culture, dealing with people, in a sensitive and an inclusive way. Then there's the public diplomacy, which has to deal with communication of, different foreign governments and creating a dialogue through them. And then, of course, there's the idea of citizen diplomacy, which talks about different individuals having the right or maybe even the responsibility to shape foreign relations, as they say, quote unquote, one handshake at a time. So I tell people if we look at all of those and then we fuse that with cuisine, it's kind of the idea of using cuisine to create cross-cultural understanding. And it's, an age-old notion that really got coined through Hillary Clinton's creation of the diplomatic culinary partnership.
Right. Yeah. Great overview. I love that I noticed on your website, in your bio, that you were once called in an Egyptian newspaper the, quote, cook to the kings.
Yes. Yes.
Which sounds like Antonin Carême, who I've mentioned on the show and I've written about. He was titled the King of Cooks and the Cook of Kings. He was this 18th century amazing French chef. So you share this prestigious title with a very important historical chef. How many, who have you cooked for? What foreign dignitaries, or I guess if you don't want to cook and tell, I guess, in general, what sorts of heads of state have you been involved with cooking for?
Sure. Oh, thank you. Well, the thing with Antonin Carême, I did think that was a neat tie, and I don't know if they even realized they did that or if they just had heard that term in English. Sometimes when you're dealing with different languages, you don't know if they'd realize the symbolism of and the importance of what they're giving you. But I have blogged about Carême, and I'm obviously I consider myself to be a student of his, and I think his work in classifying cuisine was amazing. And the post that I posted about him, believe it or not, on my blog has gotten more hits than any other post. And I think that's amazing, considering it's not he's not a household name, especially in the United States. But so that did mean a lot to me. That was by a newspaper called El Ain, which means the eye in Egypt, and it's kind of a contemporary, like a People magazine type of a thing, but it's print like a newspaper. And so they called me that, and they gave me that title because at that time when I was consulting for a restaurant in Egypt, and a journalist came to the restaurant and got to meet me and got to talking with me, and it was during the time that Prince William was getting married, and CNN.com had asked me to write a menu proposal for Prince William's wedding. And so I wrote it and I blogged about it, and they put it on the internet. And when I told him about what I was doing, I think that's how he gave me that title. But really, for at that time in Egypt, it was a lot between like the governor of Luxor and the mayor of Baltimore, or different ambassadors of different countries like Yemen, or we were doing a lot of different things at the time with the Egyptian embassy. Even people from the Israeli embassy have called me for different things, and most of the Arab embassies at some point. And sometimes it comes directly through the embassy, or sometimes it will come through a particular organization that is doing an event with them that will need help. Sometimes it'll be a chef that maybe I've worked with a long time ago, and they'll say, hey, I need to do this, tell me, what can I do? And so my name may be on the forefront or it may not, it doesn't matter, but it's really, really fun. And I'm always very, very happy to do it. And sometimes it's been between two very pivotal, the dinner itself or the exchange itself will be between two very pivotal political organizations that are meeting for the first time, where there might be a lot of tension. And so there's definitely going to be heavy policy involved. And so I like to do those dinners because it's not just fun and it's not just frou-frou. It's really making people as comfortable as possible, and really opening up conversation is important for those. And I don't want to name names for them because I don't want to add to the if there were any kind of animosity between them, to talk about that. But those are the most challenging and the most fun for me because when I start planning a menu, I look at what is symbolic in both cultures, what they like. And then you have to go with the more practical of what they can eat. And sometimes when you're dealing with very distinct cultures, that list can be very, very small. So to make a great inclusive menu out of only a couple of things people can enjoy eating is a big challenge and really fun for me. And I got very interested in doing that a long time ago. I think maybe 15 years ago, I was reading an article in the Washington Post where there was a very big state dinner they were having downtown, and the king of Saudi Arabia was coming, and the top rabbis from Israel were coming, and the chef decided to put pork as the entree and the only entree option at
Mm,
nobody noticed until later. Nobody mentioned it until later, but so that was not a big faux pas. So I try not only to have faux pas, but to have really to have inclusive foods that everyone will feel comfortable and happy around, and hopefully make conversation as easy as possible.
right. Yeah, I'm reminded of the recent, or a couple years ago, the state dinner that President Obama welcomed 50 African heads of state. And I can just imagine what the dining list looked like for that, the no-go zone for all the cuisines that people can't eat there. So,
Oh, that's right. That I've done a lot with different African embassies too. You remind me now, Sam. I have a couple of entries on the blog. One of them I called Under the African Sun, and we had the Central African Republic and Benin, Togo, and many countries, and it was absolutely amazing, delicious, delicious food. And you could see their similarities between many culinary cultures, not only Egypt but also Western Africa and Southern American soul food,
right.
and that was a very, very fun event.
In addition to having these inclusive menus and dinners, you've also hosted cultural education seminars for diplomats. Is that correct?
Sure. Yep, that's
Okay.
right.
How did you initially begin hosting them?
Sure. Well, I think that really started at the time when I was doing things for the ambassadors, and I was just going and asking, I would like to do that. One time in particular, I remember there was something at the Kennedy Center that they were hosting called the Arabesque Festival. And they were going to be working with many different Arab embassies on cultural programs, musical programs, food programs. And I literally went to everyone I know at those embassies and said, I would like to be your food person. I want to be the one who ties in. I don't care what kind of music you have. I don't care what kind of clothes you're having. I just tell me, and then I'll tie it into food. And I was so excited. And I remember one of them in particular, I had to do it, and I was really driven. So I went to the one particularly small embassy that nobody knew about their cuisine or culture, and they didn't have anybody who was already lined up to do this. But I was trying to convince the ambassador that I was the person. And he just looked at me at one point. He said, Amy, do you see a line outside the door? Nobody else even wants to do this. Of course we're going to use you. Don't worry. But I said, I have to be the one. So that was one of the things that I did. And then, of course, through the sister cities. Also, the Fulbright Foundation contacted me. And whenever they would have people going over to get scholarships in particular countries that I had done a lot of work on, they would call me and say, can you lecture our group that's going over at this time? And I was working with the Fulbrighters in Cairo, and they would arrive in Cairo and give them lectures. Johns Hopkins, the School for Advanced International Studies, would call me and ask me to do specific things if they were working on different topics. And, it's a lot of word of mouth. Then Georgetown, they have a Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. So there, every year in the summer, they host different educators, teachers from different schools all around the country to come and learn about the Arab culture so they can then take that information and go and teach it in their classroom. And so they would have me give lectures to them. And I would always be different. One time, for example, I used the Gardner's model of multiple intelligences, but I applied it to the Arab culture. And I explained how they could do that in their classroom regardless of, what they were teaching. Or one time we did ancient Egypt for educators. And I wanted to, because a lot of the kids study ancient Egypt, so I wanted to talk about different ways in which they could, study ancient Egypt outside of just history. And so that was really, really fun. And then here in Washington, we have some diplomatic organizations. So I used to volunteer at some of them. Like one is called the Hospitality and Information System for Diplomats. And we would have different programs that we would put on for diplomats or educational things about different cultures for the members to learn. That was really fun. And then recently, in the last few years, I've become aware of the different state programs that they have for international visitors. So for your listeners who might not be familiar with it, each state and their capital, they usually have an international visitor center, which will get different foreign delegations throughout the year from different cultures to work on different projects. It might be, for example, in LA, they might have a group coming who wants to learn about the American fashion industry, the American jewelry industry. Or here in DC, we might have a group of educators come from Kazakhstan, or, there's a whole wide range of things. So I went to LA this year through the International Visitors Center, and I did a presentation that was in collaboration with the Italy America Chamber of Commerce West and the Italian Cultural Institute. And I talked about the Italian influences on American culture. And then they called me from Utah. They have a Center for Citizen Diplomacy there. They asked me to come out and speak to their group That's a really fascinating group because this is a group of volunteers who just, they call themselves citizen diplomats. And whenever these groups of foreign officials come, they host them in their home so they can experience a typical American meal. And so they wanted me to talk to them about specific groups of people that they were dealing with and, how to make their experience better, which was so beautiful. I mean, the fact that they even open up their home is lovely, but the fact that they would give their time to learn about how to make that more appropriate for people, I thought was really, really beautiful. And so I do things with them. And also this last year with Global Ties, every year that organization has a conference here in DC. And so I was able to do a chat on culinary diplomacy last year there. That was really, really fun. And those are some of the seminars that I've done, but people can, you can go on my YouTube channel. And I have, for example, the one in Utah, they actually made a podcast of and put up so they can see that. And it's called Building Culinary Bridges Through Global Cuisine. So my channel on YouTube is Amy Riolo, and that will be on there. It's the start to finish. And there are also some different things for Library of Congress and other things.
Great. I have one question to back up. How did you have the gumption to just walk into an embassy and ask to cook for them? Did you know anyone, or did you just walk up very confident?
It was pure drive. In Italian, there's this word called pazzia, which is it's a really strong drive, but it's also like a little bit craziness. And that's what it was. It was just this gut feeling that I had to. I was so driven, nobody could have stopped me. That was I was put on the planet to do that. I don't know. And I just went to them, and luckily they responded, and it was really fun because, for example, the Yemen one that we ended up doing, they ended up having this really well-known oud or lute, and it's called an English player, a music player named Ahmed Fati, who's very, very well known there. He came and he played the music, and he was sitting on the chair in the one room in the ambassador's residence, and then we all sat on the floor Indian style because they have the wonderful Persian carpets, and we had the buffet of the traditional Yemeni food, and I gave a PowerPoint, and it was so lovely to have this closed, intimate experience with one of their premier musicians and the ambassador, but yet doing a very folkloric type of things in that context. It was absolutely beautiful. And then another time we had an event at the I had many events at the Egyptian ambassador's residence. And one of them was, we talked about the Egyptian influence on architecture and Orientalism, because there was an organization in Washington that was interested in Egyptian architecture. And I was friends of the ambassador's wife. And she said, do you know anything about this? Would you like to talk about this? And I said, believe it or not, I talked about that in my Nile Style book. So sure. So I created this PowerPoint. There's a lot of, believe it or not, Egyptian influence right here in Washington alone in the architecture, let alone around the world. So we talked about that, and then we had a lovely meal, which I helped create with this chef. And then we had this amazing tablescape set up, and each table was given the name of an Egyptian pharaoh or goddess. So Aphrodite's Greek, but Isis or Nefertari or different things like that. And we had these papyrus menus, just beautiful. And a lot of women came to that. That was for an organization called Club One, which is an organization that involves a lot of diplomats and political leaders, female, in Washington area. So it was a really, really fun event.
Wow. This brings up a question that I've wanted to ask since looking through your schedule. The classes you teach. One of them is called The History of Middle Eastern Cuisine and Its Influence on Gastronomy. I'm curious if you can give us just the 2-minute rundown. I don't know if that's enough time, maybe 5 minutes, but what is, I know a little bit about Middle Eastern cuisine. I've traveled there a little bit, but what would you say, or what in that lecture do you say the overall influence on global gastronomy, on what we eat here in America? What is the influence of Middle Eastern cuisine?
Sure. Well, that's a great point, Sam. And of course, 2 minutes aren't enough. So I'll say right up front, it's on YouTube. There is a Library of Congress podcast. I have two of them. One is called The Cuisine and Culture, Understanding Egyptian Cuisine and Culture. And the other one is called Cuisine and Culture of the Arab World. So a lot of the content is there. So listeners can always go and watch that and get all of the details. But I'll give you a very brief synopsis, because I started doing that because when I started out in the writing cookbooks and wanting to be a culinary personality, I changed careers. And as a Southern Italian, whenever I would go to pitch an article or pitch a book, people would say, we already have an Italian chef. And I would say, yeah, but they're not from my region, or maybe they don't speak the language, or maybe they have a different experience. I mean, we don't care. We've got the Italian thing covered. So I wasn't selling any work. But then when they found out that I had, lived in the Middle East and I have a lot of experience in the Arab world, they would start asking me to do things on Morocco and do different types of articles. So culinary, Cooking Light called me a North African culinary expert. And so I just went with that. And so that's when I started giving these types of lectures. And then here in DC, there was a really large interest. In the food history world and the culinary anthropology world, the Middle East is always left out. If you look at the origins of culinary diplomacy and you look it up online, all of the sources are going to say that it started in Greece and Rome, which we know, civilization existed long before that. So it started much earlier than that. And that's what I like to give people in that lecture, is the filling in the void of what's missing between how things got from Asia to the New World, or how they got from Europe to Asia. It's amazing how that, they usually only have a paragraph dedicated to the Mediterranean or the Middle East, when it really is the backbone of a lot of things that we do. So in modern times, things that we look at every day, like sandwiches and birthday cake and biscotti and, just kind of everyday foods that we take for granted, these were around in the Middle East in antiquity. And you can actually, go and look at that. Breads were being baked and shaped in mass quantities since the third millennia before the Common Era. So, very, very early on. And if you go to the Agricultural Museum in Cairo and look at what's on display from these ancient times, you'll be like, oh, that's a bagel. Oh, that's this. Oh, and that's what's missing. Also, one of the neat things that I found there, just to give an example, is there was Jewish mortuary offering bread at this museum in Cairo, which means that the ancient Hebrews were fusing their culture with what was going on with ancient Egypt and making these offering breads. And so I think that's really, really cool. So I talk about things like that. I start with the Bedouins and this nomadic society, and I start with things, in ancient Iraq or Mesopotamia, and I talk about what was going on there, what the geography was like, what the people were like, how you had to be a culinary diplomat, because if you were a nomadic tribe and other tribes, you had to stop in their camp and, trade with them in order to get along, you had no choice but to be diplomatic. That was how people lived. And the nomads would usually give their knowledge of the weather and the geography to the people who were more stationary, and they would provide the dairy or the fruits and vegetables and what people needed in sustenance. And then I kind of go forward and I talk a lot about how we should look at things in terms of empires and caliphates, and really instead of periods of war, but in terms of cultural periods. And that's what helps shape the cuisine, because nowadays obviously you can go to Israel and you can go to Egypt and you can get a very similar dish, but they're different because of the different cultural influences, but they're also very similar. So it's all of those groups that were in common there that led to the similar things. And then some of their uniqueness will be in terms of what they had and what they didn't had. But throughout the Middle East, we see strong influence of, obviously not only Mesopotamia, but ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, the Phoenicians, the Romans. And then we can take it forward to all the different, we have the Jewish cultures that were in all the different countries at different times before the nationalistic borders were set up. And then you have the different caliphates like the Umayyads and the Abbasids, and the Fatimids were one of my favorite because they were great culinary diplomats. They just wanted, to boost economy. They wanted everybody to get along. And so they would have these religious festivals in the 9th century of the Common. They didn't care what religion you were, but they encouraged people to go out and celebrate. So in that time, we can see like Jews and Christians and Muslims celebrating together, eating a lot of the same festival foods. And so nowadays we have these dishes which nobody knows, that the other cultures eat them, but that they're synonymous with the Prophet Muhammad's birthday in Cairo, or the feast of Santa Cecilia in Sicily, or something else. So I think that's really, really cool. And I like to talk about all of those caliphates and all of those different groups that we don't normally hear about, and how they carry through with today. So nowadays, Christmas time, you go to the Dina de Luca and you see torrone, and you think, oh, it's this great Italian thing that's gourmet product or whatever. It was actually, this is something that was eaten for religious festivals way, way back when. So that's kind of what I talk about in some of those. And then if I can, and if time permits, I give a little bit of suggestion and encouragement in terms of the role that agriculture should play in the modern Middle East today, and why it's not something to be overlooked, and why it's important, and in terms of economy, in terms of political stability, and that kind of thing.
Wow. I'm definitely going to watch those lectures, because that was like the perfect rundown, but I just want more. Are there a couple of names? Is there a Kahem or a culinary diplomat, or a couple from the ancient or modern Middle Eastern world that you'd say really crystallized the field, or crystallized what it meant to be a culinary diplomat?
That's a great question. And I think one thing to understand, Sam, I always try to tell people is we, the United States, we're very technical, and we're very focused, and our viewpoint is very sharp and acute. Whereas in this time periods that we're talking about, people had a much broader view of things. And even nowadays, if you go to the Middle East, people don't think of food as belonging to a certain religion, they just think of it as food. And what makes it unique is the fact that, Jews will abstain from it at this time, and Muslims will abstain from it at this time, but the food is for everybody. And so they look at it in terms of a different way. So they definitely wouldn't use the term culinary diplomat at this time. It's just being a good person, or being a good host, or being a good Christian, Muslim, or Jew, because you're offering people food. So they have a different way of looking at things. But in terms of, if we're looking back and we're looking for inspiration and what we would find interesting, I've written a lot about the Fatimids, and I do think that they were a North African Shiite caliphate based in what would be modern day Tunisia. And they claimed their descendants through the Prophet Muhammad's daughter, whose name was Fatima. So that's how they got that name. But also in terms of people, if we look at like Avicenna, the father of modern medicine, and Al-Kindi, we can find a lot of work on food. There are still 12 medieval Arabic texts, cookbook texts, that are available. In those days, people would be, just like in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, they'd be philosophers, but they'd also be astronomers and doctors and pharmacists, and maybe they read a couple cookbooks and like that. So I look at them. And if we want to go further back to Rome, of course, Apicius. That's spelled Apicius for people who aren't familiar. It's a Latin name, but for a Roman philosopher who's considered to be the father of all gourmands, because he actually committed suicide because he was a writer. He wasn't very wealthy, but he couldn't afford to eat the way he wanted to. He wanted to eat like the emperors. So he actually committed suicide because he couldn't afford the type of diet that he wanted. But his cookbook, it's called On Cooking in English, is one of the great insights into what was going on in the culinary world in ancient times.
Speaking of ancient cities, can you talk to us about Mecca as a gastro-diplomacy destination?
Sure. One of my most strange experiences in Mecca that I tell people when they say, what was your weird food experience there, was not even the local cuisine, because I had a lot of Saudi cuisine already. I knew what it was, and it was delicious. But there was a Roy Rogers right across the street from the Grand Mosque. So it's really weird to see people making this pilgrimage, and you're hearing all of this really spiritual stuff, and it's like you're transported. It could have been 1,000 years ago, but then at the same time, right there is Roy Rogers. And I don't eat that type of food normally, but I had to tell you, there was something really satisfying about sitting and eating like American fast food in front of the Kaaba. I had to do it, and it was interesting, because certain spiritual centers are only open for Muslims or for people who practice a certain way. It's hard to pinpoint it as a culinary diplomacy place, because they don't have the infrastructure yet to open it for everybody. But within the people who are there, and within the people who are able to go and make the pilgrimage, it is very diverse, and it is very vast, because over the centuries, and I talk about this a lot in Arabian Delights, people weren't able to sometimes go back from the pilgrimage, or maybe they didn't want to. Maybe they only had enough money to get there, and then they stayed. And so you have all of this wonderful, Southeast Asian and Central Asian and different influences from all around the world in this one town that in a certain area looks very similar to the way it was a long, long time ago. And so that's really neat, to have all of these people coming together with very different customs and very different ways of life, and very different, quote unquote, I don't believe in them, but to explain a little bit better, classes, and all coming together in this one place as if they were equal. and then eating, very similar foods. There are a lot of, in Saudi Arabia, they have a lot of rice type dishes that are called kabsa, which are actually the predecessor. They're the grandfather of paella. And so you have rice dishes they could do with chicken, meat, or and people usually sit around and eat them communally. And of course, they have a lot of date-based dishes and a lot of, fruit and vegetable type dishes, a lot of grains and different things. And it's really very delicious. But traditional Arab culture, they don't want to put people out, and they don't want to make people try something that they wouldn't normally be comfortable with. So unless you're in Morocco or Lebanon, most cultures that you go to in the Arab world, when you arrive, they will try to feed you your own food, or at least have your own food available so that you don't have to feel like you're not comfortable. And it's very, so I would go around with different delegations, and, one day I would get the Moroccan meal because I happen to have a Moroccan abaya on, and they would think I was Moroccan, which is really fun. Or, sometimes if I was with the Americans, I would get the more, what they call, quote unquote, continental food. So you had to really know where to go in order to get the authentic food. And people traditionally, no matter how wealthy they are, will sit on carpets and eat. They don't sit at tables. And that's a very beautiful experience because, when you sit that way and when you go to eat, it's such a comfortable way to sit that you automatically are put at ease, and you automatically start the conversation in a different place than you would by sitting up formally at a table. And that was an insight that I had that I really liked from there.
I remember you talking about that in one of your lectures, and on this podcast, we've discussed the importance of both cooking and dining rituals. And so can you tell us a little bit about why you chose this holistic lens of including both the rituals, like not eating at a dinner table, as well as the food, instead of just focusing on the food?
Sure, that's a great point, Kelsey. Well, I think that, the way that we enjoy the food is every bit as important, if not more, than the food itself. That's just my belief. So I always try to incorporate as much of that in any book I do, regardless of the focus. I think it's fun for people. I think, minimum, it's interesting, trivia for people to talk about or to mention, or have an icebreaker at the table. But at most they might do it, and they might be able to experience that for themselves. And I feel very lucky to have been able to experience those things. And I do think that the food tastes different when it's served in the proper way and when it's eaten in the right way. I mean, I just think, think of eating a hamburger with a knife and fork. It's just, it's not the same. And it's the same thing with different places around the world. If something is meant to be eaten that way and you serve it that way, I think it's just going to be enjoyed more. I think it's at a certain level digested more. And I think it's more pleasurable and more fun to get yourself in the experience. One time I had an Arabian tea party for one of these diplomatic groups that I used to belong to. And one of my friends brought the Libyan ambassador's wife and her friend. At that time, they're no longer in office, but they came, and it was all of these women from all over the world. And we hosted it at a German diplomat's home. And so everybody was walking in, and I was saying, please take off your shoes and step into this room and sit down. And they were like, but there are no chairs. And I was like, no, we're going to be sitting on the floor. And I really wanted them to experience that and experience that way. And everybody still talks about it because, this group is not known for doing things like that. And so it was really, really fun to be in that environment. And then they loved it. We had henna artists come and paint henna on people's hands. And it was just really, really fun and unique. And to be able to offer that experience to people, I think is I don't know, it's a pleasure, and I'm very lucky to be able to do it.
Yeah, it sounds like quite an experience. Although I wonder if anyone was wearing a pencil skirt. I can imagine it'd be difficult.
We had some issues, but there's getting around it. You can put a cover over your lap or something like that. We have all kinds of ways around that, but it was very, very fun. And those are the kind of things I like to do.
Well, right now it's Ramadan. Can you tell us some of the culinary traditions associated with the holiday?
Sure. So for people who want more information on Ramadan, there are a lot of posts on my blog, and they can just go there and, see the different things and, read about the different experiences. One of the things I like to tell people is that when we think of Ramadan, we think of the hardship of it and the difficulty of it and how it would be so difficult and a sacrifice. But actually, for people who practice it, it is a sacrifice, and I don't mean to downplay that at all. But it's also a beautiful, blessed time that's anticipated and that people look forward to because it's a break from the norm. At the end of the day, it's a break from traditions, and it's kind of turning the schedule on its head. So it's a really special time. And people who observe Ramadan believe that that's the month. It's on a lunar calendar, so it changes every year. They believe that that's the month that the divine sent the Torah and the Bible and the Quran. So that's why it's a holy month, because all of this divine inspiration came at that time. So people fast from sun up to sundown. And the fast means that nothing can go past their throat. So no chewing gum, no water, no any food from that time. So basically what that means culinarily are that there are two main meals. There's the suhoor, or breakfast, and there's the iftar, or the breakfast meal that's after sundown. And those are the big thing. And some people even skip suhoor. I don't recommend it at all, because they want to sleep, but that's before dawn. So there are these two main meals, and what you eat in those meals is obviously really important because it has to last throughout the day, and it has to keep you healthy and hydrated. So I was just asked by a newspaper called Sharq al-Awsat, which is the largest Middle Eastern newspaper. It's available all around the Arab countries. And they asked me to do an article on nutritional tips for people fasting during Ramadan during the summer. Because as you know, keeping hydrated is so important. And how do you do it at this time? So that should come out very shortly, and I've done that. So normally for the suhoor, people in the breakfast, people will eat things like eggs and cheese and yogurt and fruit and maybe vegetables and maybe some leftovers from the night before, and drink a lot of water and really just try to get themselves a little bit of nutrients for the day that's going to start. And then the breakfast meal is a big deal because there are a lot of traditions involved in it. So people, the very first thing they do is they break their fast with a date, because that's a prophetic tradition. Dates are mentioned many, many times. In the 146 hadith, which are the recorded sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, the word date appears 248 times. So you're recommended to break your fast with a date. And some people make a thing that's called khoshaf, which is they macerate dates and apricots and raisins and other dried fruits, and they'll take a spoon of that as they first break their fast. And that kind of gets the sugar flowing back in your body and gets you ready for the meal. And then usually people go from that into an apricot juice. And the apricot juice, apricot has been proven since ancient times. They've used it to prevent dehydration. So there's nutritional benefit, but it's also, of course, delicious. And then you'll usually go into a light soup, and then maybe a rice dish or a rice and meat dish, some kind of main courses, vegetables, and then later on in the evening there'll be desserts and nuts and fruit. Ramadan culinarily is like the time when people put out all their showstoppers, just like other people would for the high holy holidays in the Jewish faith or at Christmas in the Christian faith. That's the time when, especially because people are fasting, they have more time to kind of think about food and fantasize about food. And so in Arabian Delights, in Nile Style, I actually have whole chapters dedicated to Ramadan, both the suhoor and the iftar, with menus, what to do, what the reasoning behind it is, and how to prepare the food. Although anything could be eaten as long as it's what is called halal, which means permissible. So really any food the meat has to be halal, which means it's slaughtered according to Islamic traditions, has to be treated fairly. It has to be, the animal has to not suffer. And then it's butchered a certain way, and then they can eat that type of meat. Or, of course, fish is fine, and fruits and vegetables and all of those kinds of things are fine. And that's usually what's done. Food is also given a lot as charity during Ramadan. There's a big emphasis on charity. There's a belief that everything that you do is augmented 10 times. So if you do a good act, a kind act, it's augmented 10 times. If you do something that's harmful, that's augmented 10 times. So people try to do as much as good as possible. It's very common to give away gifts of dates, to give food as charity, to give money to charitable organizations. And then in the 9th century, the Fatimids also used to put gold coins in the cookies. There are these cookies that are white. They're butter cookies that are topped with sugar. They're called kak. And they were originally an ancient Egyptian cookie. But the Fatimids used to put gold coins in them and give them to the poor before the end of Ramadan. And so now people usually eat those at the holiday at the end of Ramadan, the Eid al-Fitr. They'll give those cookies away, no longer with the gold coins, but they're a common culinary tradition.
And you said we can learn more about that you have a couple of cookbooks that cover Ramadan, and you have some blog posts?
Sure. Arabian Delights has a lot on Ramadan, and Nile Style also has a lot on it. And then on my blog, amyriolo.blogspot.com, there are many, many posts. One of them a few years ago, I posted every day a different type of thing for Ramadan, and it explains, from day one what happens in a city, where how they, for decorations, for example, they put up the different colored lanterns, and it's these big colored cloths, and that's how they decorate for Ramadan, and what the minarets do, and there's a quote from Naguib Mahfouz, who was the Egyptian Nobel laureate for literature. In one of his books, he talks about how Ramadan brought fasting to the main character. Ramadan brought happiness and joy to the main character's heart, because it was the time of fasting, but it was also the time of family, and so it gives a nice little look into a different aspect of what we think than just straight kind of suffering during a hard month kind of a thing.
Right. Well, I'll have to get those books, and to all our listeners, they'll have to go out and pick them up too, and read your blog as well. I've got one more question, kind of stepping a bit larger. For listeners, or for Kelsey and myself, or for anyone who is interested in following in your footsteps, you've become what is a very successful consultant in the culinary space, focusing on international relations, culinary diplomacy. What skill sets would you recommend developing, and how would you pursue a career like your own?
Oh, wow, that's a big topic, Sam.
I know.
I'm going to try to tackle it, and if I don't get there, you can keep asking questions. The main thing, I think, is really a respect for it, a respect for other cultures, a respect for other people, and just this insatiable curiosity of wanting to know more, and wanting to have someone to pass that on to, and somebody who cares, and making it be important. Outside of DC, when people hear the terms culinary diplomat, a lot of times they'll laugh, and they'll just laugh, and they'll kind of roll their eyes and be like, tell us what that is, or else on the other hand, you have people who just go to an international festival one time and eat food from a food truck, and then use the hashtag culinary diplomat when they haven't done anything. So there's opposite ends of the spectrum. But I think any art that can be associated with diplomacy, or any profession is better, because it's very needed in the world, and there's room for everybody. It's not even though these are niche types of careers, the more people that are doing it, the better, because then we won't need a term anymore. Then we'll just, be peaceful and have great economies, and everybody will be happy. But for what I think people should do is just really learn, question things, do research, be as informed as you possibly can about a particular culture, about whatever you do. You might want to be representing the U.S. overseas. So learn as much as possible and look for those similarities, so that when you're in an environment where you can talk about it, that you're able to literally bring things to the table that people need and that they want to hear. And then after kind of fulfilling that and really doing your research and your homework, I would tell people to network, to join as many international organizations as possible. If it's not part of their direct career path now, to go ahead and volunteer and join international groups, join things like these, citizen diplomacy groups that they have in the different states, or organizations like Global Ties, and just really, really try to be at the forefront of what's going on internationally. Travel or host people. And as they travel, I also tell them to try to look for experiences that are not, just tourist experiences, but to start with places where they know people, so that they can go and have a really intimate behind the scenes look of what goes on, and that type of thing. And to not be, another important thing is to not be objective. So you can't do what we're doing and be what I think is a true cultural native. You have to be able to be kind of a little bit, even though you can respect your own culture and be very proud of it, but you have to have a little bit of a cultural chameleon in you, and be able to go into other places and say, yes, I have my beliefs, and yes, I think this, but I'm here, and this is what's beautiful about that, and this is what's similar about that, and this is what I can learn about that, and to transmit that in the work, because that's the real inclusive part, and to have that goal of the goal is always inclusion. So whether you're looking for similar musical notes, or similar philosophies, or similar rules, it doesn't matter. It's as long as you have that goal of finding a bond, and make it a habit. When I mentor students, sometimes I tell them, it sounds funny, but go out into the world and look for as many similarities as you can find. When we were raised, here we had like Where's Waldo, and they would give us those things that would tell us to find what's wrong or find the difference. And that's what we do. We'd go through the little color books and find the things that stood out that were different. But if you go through life and you go through cultures and you look for what's similar, that sets you up for a whole other viewpoint and literally for success in this type of thing, because you have that as a starting place. And I think that's what we need more of.
Thank you. If I had heard that 5 years ago, I don't know where I'd be today, but likely more successful.
But hopefully still here.
Hopefully still here, but in a more successful way.
I think he's very successful. This has been a great show.
Thank you, Amy.
Well, every show, Amy, we end with one question. And so for you, I'd like to pose it to you today. What is your universal truth about food?
My universal truth about food is something that I got from my grandmother. And this, she passed a few years ago, and she was my mentor in food, but she was also my mentor in life and in everything. And when I say mentor, the thing that I respect the most about her and that I admired the most was she never set out to teach us anything. She just did, and she let us be part of it, and we observed and we learned without her ever giving us a quote unquote lesson. And so I say that my universal truth, because of her, is that food is the foundation. That it's not just something that fuels our bodies, but it's actually the foundation upon which our families, communities, cultures, and lives are built. And that I owe to her.
Thank you, Amy. Just moving forward, how can our listeners follow your work? You've mentioned a couple of the books that you've written. You've mentioned your blog. How else, if they want to take a class with you, if they're in the DC area, how can they find all this information, and how can they follow you?
Oh, thanks, Sam. So I have a website. It's amyriolo.com. And on there, I list my calendar events, my culinary tours, my classes, all of the places I'm speaking. And I am going to be doing this history of Middle Eastern cuisine and its influence on gastronomy on the 29th in Bethesda, Maryland. So if anyone's interested, that's just coming up next week. My books are all available on Amazon, and pretty much everything is either on the website or the blog. I'm on all of the social media sites, and I post lots of fun stuff every day.
Cool. Thank you. We will all be following, and look forward to learning more from you.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you, Kelsey. This has been amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to The Culinary Citizen today. You, as always, can connect with us on our Facebook page, The Culinary Citizen. Feel free to like it if you actually do like it. If you don't like it, give us some feedback. You can send us an email, tell us what you'd prefer, and then maybe in the future you can like our page. It's if you want to email us, it's culinarycitizen@gmail.com. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Leave a review if you like what you heard. If you have any recommendations for a future show, if you want to reach us, feel free to send us an email, send us a message. You know where to find us. So thanks again, Amy. Thank you, Kelsey.